Bastards podcast, episode 36. We're going to spend the next hour mostly disagreeing about music, but maybe also occasionally and very reluctantly agreeing about some stuff. I'm joined as usual by Fran and Nick. How are you boys?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Yeah, doing okay. Partially
I say that, we've just been talking
good.
for 10 minutes about how we're doing really, really badly, how everything's awful and we feel like shit. So I don't know what we're talking about. Just default to say, yeah, I'm fine. I don't know what the deal is.
Well, it's no more shit than probably everyone else.
That's true. We're surviving.
Although Fran has been deaf for the past couple of weeks.
Which is fun when you do a music podcast. You know, deafness is no. The listeners do not want to know the details of why I partially lost my hearing. It's not pleasant, but it's on its way back now. So
yes,
I can hear.
It's worth something.
Good. Well, hopefully you're able to listen to some of the albums this month, and we're going to cover this time around Bright Eyes with their album Down in the Weeds, Where the World Once Was, Deftones with Ohms, Sufjan Stevens with The Ascension, Alicia Keys with Alicia. We have the classic album Woody Guthrie with Dust Bowl Ballads, and I've made a playlist for Dizzee Rascal. So let's get into this.
Let's do it.
I'm going to start with the question for Fran. What album was the most whimsical?
Okay, so before I answer, I just want to congratulate Matt on the worst opening question in the history of Wicked Bastards.
Why?
I spent quite a bit of my time trying to make a trophy for him while I couldn't hear. But I think the reason it was a really bad question is because there's only one option as an answer, isn't there, really? And that is the Bright Eyes album. I suppose being whimsical has always been a bit of a Bright Eyes trait, a kind of desire to be a little bit witty and playful in the lyrics while also telling these sort of big, grandiose stories. But yeah, because your question was so bad, I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining why Bright Eyes are whimsical. If you've heard Bright Eyes, you already know that they're whimsical. And honestly, for those who have or haven't heard Bright Eyes, I think the main thing I can say about Down in the Weeds, Where the World Once Was, is that it sounds like a Bright Eyes album. It sounds like all of their albums. If you like Bright Eyes, you'll like this album. And if you don't like Bright Eyes, you won't like this album. Personally, I've never really been a fan.
Profound right there. Wow.
It's all you can say about a Bright Eyes album, I think. I've never really been a fan. I think they do some things quite well. There's always a couple of okay songs per album. I think Just Once in the World is a good one on this album. But there is something about them that potentially I find a little bit too whimsical. But then I'll be honest, I think part of the reason I don't like them more than I do is there was a girl I really fancied when I was at college, and her boyfriend was a massive Bright Eyes fan. And he was just a total prick who wore a straw hat and a denim jacket. So now whenever I think of Bright Eyes, I think of him. I think, I suppose he wanted to be whimsical as well. So there you go. Maybe it wasn't a terrible question. But I suppose that's not entirely the band's fault. And I did have a little bit of optimism that I might like this because I was a big fan of the collaboration that Conor Oberst did with Phoebe Bridgers. It kind of made me get into his voice, which I've always struggled with a little bit. But at the end of the day, like listening to this album, I think the main thing I can do when listening to it is shrug my shoulders. It really it gives me no more emotion than that. It's kind of just very meh. So yeah, that's about all I have to say about Bright Eyes.
Okay.
Cool. What do you reckon, Nick?
I can't really disagree with Fran on this one, much as I love to. This seems to me, and I'm not an expert on Bright Eyes at all or Conor Oberst's work, but there were a couple of things that really killed the album off for me. One was, it sounds so rehashed. It sounds like I've heard it before from 10,000 indie folk bands, and they're just doing it over and over again. And in that sense, it sounded really tired, which, is not really enthusing when I'm listening to this. Especially it was the first thing on the playlist as well. So every time I started the playlist, it was like, oh, bloody hell. The second thing was his voice, and this is just a personal thing. I just cannot stand his voice at all. It's so nasal and grating. I just found it really whiny, and I found the witticisms that he tried to sing through that voice to not be that witty as well. So I just didn't land with me at all as exciting or fun. I think I might go so far as to say it kind of gives that indie folk kind of genre kind of a bad name in a way, because it seems so enfeebled, like deliberately enfeebled, that all the strokes of all the instruments are just so sort of limply hit. It just seems like I just don't see the energy behind it at all. And in that sense, I just wouldn't go back to it, certainly, and I can't see what the excitement is about it. So yeah, I agree with Fran. It was very meh, is the word he often uses.
Cool.
That's me.
How do you spell that word?
Right.
Out of interest.
MEH.
Yeah, that's how I spell it. So. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Is there another way to spell it?
I don't know. I just, a real word.
Are you talking about?
It's not a real word. It's fair. It makes a fair point. It's not a real
I just
word.
wondered if everybody spells it the way that I do.
MEA. Yeah.
Meh. Yeah.
I think it is a real word, isn't it, in the dictionary?
Is it a real word though? Segueing back to apply to this album, Matt.
Yeah, sorry, I was taking us off piece.
Exactly, I was trying to steer the ship back. This is something reasonably relevant.
Supposed to be my job to keep us on track. Well, I think for me, it's a 3 for 3 to start us off. I have completely separate criticisms compared to you guys. It is a Mert album. I find it weird, like his singing style. I don't hate his voice, but they used a lot of interstitial in this album, like weird just samples and shit like that, which is often works. But he has quite a run of the mill tone to his voice, which is almost like talking anyway. And so I found that kind of disorienting, having his regular kind of talking singing with a bunch of talking mixed in. It was it was just disorienting for me.
Whining talking, I didn't know. I think you mean, to be fair.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
It
Try
was
listening to that while you were partially deaf. That was very confusing. I didn't know if there was people outside my window or if it was the album.
I think it's like some of the songs, like Forced Convalescence, they reminded me of other bands, Brand New, and they're like more alt indie emo as well. And to think that like the forced melodrama that he's trying to have is reminding me of like early 2000s Brand New. That isn't like, I like that from that time, but that's not a good thing for an album in 2020, I don't think. And then
I think Bright Eyes were hugely influential on some of those bands, weren't they? And that's why what I'm getting when I say their albums have never really changed. They're still doing the same album they were doing back then.
Yeah,
so
exactly. That's the massive issue, right? It's 2020, and you've got to move a little bit.
How long has this been going then? This project or Connor?
Bright Eyes. I mean, when was I was in college in 2005-ish, so at least since then. I think there were a few albums in then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it takes a lot of creative energy to manage to keep going for that length of time. There are bands who do it, of course. We both know. We all know some of them, but it's not common, and that's a tall order.
They also haven't released an album in a decade. It's not like they've been working on this project, so you'd expect them to be away from it and maybe evolve because they're doing other things.
Well, I wasn't aware of that. I thought they'd been going steadily all the way through. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
No,
he did a few
been doing
solo albums
stuff.
and the stuff with Phoebe Bridgers, which was better actually. If you ask me, I quite liked his solo album that was about 3-4 years ago, and I really liked the Better Oblivion Community Centre with Phoebe Bridgers. I think maybe because it's got another voice on it. It's not just his voice, because just his voice can be a bit much, I think.
Yeah, his album with Phoebe Bridgers is pretty damn good. I think the biggest thing that annoyed me about this album is just way too long. Like it's a common thing I find. Like if you have slow paced music that's not really driven and going anywhere, you can't go on for like over an hour because it just really just drags. Yeah, so I think like Fran, I've never been into him, but this didn't change my opinion. I still think the best thing he's done is help discover Bon Iver, and that's it.
Didn't know he did that.
I didn't know he did that either, no.
I championed him. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it was him. I could be wrong. Okay. It could have been someone else now. Could be another
We'll take it.
white dude who does middle of the road rock indie.
Wow, high praise for Bon Iver as well, implicit in that, I think, but still.
He's one of my favourites.
I know.
Don't you get started on Bon Iver again?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just change tracks then.
Yep.
Nick, what was the most thought-provoking album for you?
I'm going to go. Well, I'm going to say that what I'm going with is not really an obvious answer in a sense. I'm going to pick Deftones, but I'm not really going to pick it. It made me think a lot about what I didn't really like about it and what was flawed in it in certain ways, rather than it was a fantastic album. You know?
Yeah.
I didn't absolutely hate it, but so the first thing I'll say is I have a little meter on my sound card for like when sound's coming out of the speakers, and it indicates higher when it's louder and lower when it's quieter, right? This album, after the first 30 seconds, is completely flat on that meter for like an hour. It's unbelievable how even it is, almost entirely flat. And I just felt like that really was indicative of what the album felt like as well. It felt like it was, I'll talk about what it was trying to be in a minute, but it felt like it was very boxed off. And obviously the issue is compression. There's so much compression on it that's what's killed the dynamics and the energy in the performance. But I think it doesn't want to do that. I think my sense is that the band want to be heavy and dynamic and exciting, but it comes across because of this massive amounts of compression as two-dimensional, which I think which is why I said that it was thought-provoking, because it really made me wonder what is it about this. I mean, they are absolutely going like all out, balls to the wall to try and be as extreme as possible, and it comes across as very, very, I might even describe it as placid, honestly. That's the tone of it to me. So it made me think, what is, and this is a conversation we probably had before on here, I'm sure we have, about what heaviness is, to me, the distortion does not equal heaviness. There's a lot of distortion on it, and there's a lot of loudness in it. That doesn't equal heaviness either, for me. It's much more about intensity and darkness for that to work, and this album didn't come across as that intense or that dark because of these other technical issues I thought it had. So I understand, and I have actually looked into a little bit, actually doing some research for once, into White Pony, the one that everyone says is the classic and stuff of this band from 20 years ago odd. And I heard that a little bit, and that is a more exciting prospect in the sense that it does something that's fresher at the time. And I can see a bit more why that would drive some interest. But this really, it's disappointing because I didn't go into it feeling like I wanted to really, really down on it, but it just didn't grab me, and it couldn't grab me because, as I say, it was very two-dimensional. So yeah, that's me on Deftones.
Okay,
cool. I might jump in because I found that interesting because I found this like refreshingly different from everything else we covered, and really what I've been listening to recently. I do like this genre, and it has some of the kind of classical tropes, I think, in the way he like obviously screams / sings, and the big like walls of noise, which then give way to like quieter moments. But I did find it interesting how like I've seen this album has been reviewed pretty highly in a lot of places, and I liked it, but I didn't see why it was maybe getting such. I don't understand why it's getting such high praise. And I think maybe what Nick is saying is actually something I hadn't thought about, but actually gets to the crux of why, for me, it's maybe a good album and not a great album. Because it did feel like, it felt big, and for me, it felt noisy and loud and heavy to a certain extent, but it didn't feel like it was unleashed at any point. And so maybe that is what they've hamstrung themselves there with how they produced it.
Yeah.
But
if you turn everything up to 11 at all times, then nobody knows any different, do they? After a while.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to for me.
I don't know. considering the genre and everything that's going and like their history, to me it didn't actually sound that dated, which was, I think, nice. I don't know why, but to me it sounded, maybe it's just because I'm not listening to anything else like this, and so it sounded fresh just because of the context. But yeah, I'd say I enjoyed this album and it was good, but I've been seeing people maybe putting it forward as one of their albums of the year, and it's not coming close to that for me.
Fair enough. Is that you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know if either of you heard the story this week about the Deftones guitarist Stephen Carpenter.
I didn't.
But apparently, basically, he appeared on a conspiracy podcast in the US and admitted several things. Okay, so one was that he's a flat earther. Two, he said he thinks it's physically impossible to catch a virus from another person, and that all viruses come from poisons or toxins that are already within you. And three, he said that no vaccine in history has ever worked. At this point, the host of the series, who is a conspiracy theorist, pointed out the polio vaccine, and Stephen Carpenter claimed that never happened. So obviously all that is crazy, but I'm kind of glad it came out when it did, because it gave me something.
Seems kind of persuasive to me.
You reckon?
Seems logical. No, not at all.
God.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even the NME, who are terrible now, wrote this really scathing article about him, so it's quite interesting. But in a way, I was glad this all came out when it did, because it gave me something to say about an album that I otherwise would have had nothing really to say about. This is kind of the music I would expect a flat earther to put out. Just feels very juvenile, and I find it very hard to take it seriously. There's lots of screaming and lots of wailing and lots of every instrument being played at once, and then a lot of lyrics that don't really mean anything if you delve into them. And then I think, Nick, you just talked about it always being the same, levels, but I felt like they did attempt some light and shade, but that really didn't work. I felt like when they slowed it down on a song, or even part of a song, it felt like they were saying they were really worthy and important in a way that just didn't do anything for me. So yeah, it didn't do anything for me at all. But I know they're a very loved band, and I know that this album, I think one of the reasons you're seeing so many strong reviews for it and people excited is they haven't been around for a while. And also they had the producer who produced White Pony. Is White Pony the right name?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think people are really excited about, apparently it's been the first album that sounded like that one for a while. But yeah, I'm happy to sort of hold my hands up here and say it's really not my kind of music. So I'm not the best reviewer for it, but I've always struggled to take this kind of music seriously. It's just very dramatic, very overblown, and these guys are pretty old now, and it feels like something that some teenagers would do at a school band, battle of the bands or something. So yeah, that's where I landed with Deftones. Really not my thing at all.
I think that might be a little harsh, but then again, this guy is an absolute idiot, and I'm going to take my lukewarm review and say it's terrible now.
There's got to be some kind of gag about the fact that I called it 2D and he said the Earth is flat. There's got to be some kind of connection there, but I can't think quite where it works.
I was thinking about that. That is ironic. Yeah.
I mean, if I don't recommend the album, I highly recommend listening to the podcast in which he claims all that stuff, because it's a fun listen. I mean, I don't know if fun is the right word.
I'm not going to give him any airtime.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's quite entertaining just to know that, he's very adamant. The Earth is flat, man. Just deal with it, okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. We'll have to have a word after this about our friendship.
All right, science boy. Okay.
Yeah.
What's Deftones?
Cool. Right. So maybe we'll carry on, and I'll ask Nick what his favorite album was.
I think I'm going to go with Alicia Keys. Alicia. I didn't hate this album. It's probably
my favorite. I didn't hate it.
Yeah, it's probably the best of the bunch. Yeah, I think in particular it had some really strong features on it, which really lifted it to a sort of refreshing level. I've not been a fan in the past of Alicia Keys' music, to the extent I know of it. And I think a lot of this album doesn't sound too much like that. It sounds a bit different, a bit fresher. So, for example, 3 hour drive with Sampha on it is probably the best track, I think, because it has this really interesting pacing and the changes, sort of pacing changes, and also the production changes all the way through. Although I will say, I feel like it sounds more like his track than hers in a way. It sounds more like the kind
Stealing
of
my notes, Nick.
Sorry.
Stop stealing my notes.
Sorry. Yeah, they sound nothing like it all. No, it does sound more like his track than hers, to be honest. So then there's the Jill Scott feature further down the track listing. I think it's near the end, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And that one also is a strong song, and the voice, Jill's voice is really smooth and sort of warmer than Alicia Keys's, and I really enjoyed that as well. And I remember talking about Jill Scott's album we did, didn't we? Sometime earlier this year, was it? Or was it last year?
It was this year, yeah.
And how it was, I think this was consistent with my comments about that, which was the song makes you really smile. She's smiling through this song, it sounds like, and it's just something very happy and pleasant about it, which I found quite nice. On the downside of the album, when the album gets a lot weaker, when she goes into more sort of heart-stringing tracks about like pulling sort of empowerment narratives out of the bag, which I feel like is what a lot of the songs I've heard from her before have done. I think particularly the weakest song on the album is Underdog, which I think is really, to be honest, it's like a cheese factory of facile kind of good sentiments. I wrote a lyric actually out of it. They said I would never make it, but I was built to break the mold. The only dream that I've been chasing is my own. How
Sounds
moving.
Like something you'd write, I think.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much. How moving, yeah. So, and then I think the only thing I'd say on the downside was I got the impression that, and this is not a bad thing, I suppose, it wants to be like the Solange album that we covered some long time ago now, which I absolutely loved. And I think the multi-harmony parts in a lot of the tracks, it sounds very Solange-like. I don't think it's as good as the album, but I'm glad it's reaching for that. And as I say, I think there's some positives in it. So yeah, I enjoyed it overall. I don't know if I'll jump back to it, but it might cross my path again in the future. That's me.
What about you, Fran?
So yeah, I mean, I'd never heard a Alicia Keys album before this one. From the singles I'd heard, I'd always really admired her voice. I think she's got an outstanding voice, but I'd never really been convinced that an album would do it for me. But I think after doing the podcast for the last few years and really enjoying albums from the likes of Solange, SZA, Beyonce, and Jill Scott, I thought it was probably worth giving Alicia Keys a go because I know she's considered to be up there. And yeah, I am glad that I did give it a go. I think it doesn't match up to any of those four that I've just mentioned for me. But of the four new recent releases on this month's list, it was definitely the album I found most interesting and enjoyable. I think she has a good mix of the sort of funky sound, and I don't necessarily agree with Nick about the empowerment side of some of the ballads. I think Underdog, to be honest, I can't even think of that song, but there were some of the slower empowering songs that I kind of liked. I really enjoyed Time Machine and Authors of Forever. Nick's already said this next one, but I think she nails it with the guests on this album. I think 3 Hour Drive is great, although it does sound like it should be on the Sampha album. I really like Me Times 7 with Tierra Whack. I think that's probably like the big power anthem on the album, but I mean that in a good way. I think I'd read that this album with Alicia, going for a self-titled album, it was meant to be like her big, powerful, personal album. And I think this song really sort of works well as like a, self-care sort of song. I think the Jill Scott song is really good. But then I actually really like Gramercy Park, which I think that's probably my favourite here, which I would say is on her own and is probably one of the ballads. It kind of made me think of like a modern update of a Tracy Chapman song. And I like Love Looks Better, which is again another very poppy sort of song. So yeah, I think it's a good album. I'm glad I picked it. I'm glad I listened to it. But if I'm being honest, I think it's good at a level that I enjoyed it while I listened to it, and it stood out over the other recent releases on this episode. But I'm unlikely to probably listen to it again. I might add a couple of songs to some playlists, but I can't see me sort of going back to listen to the album again. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but that's kind of where it ends, I suppose.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, this I guess a similar sentiment of this didn't at any point feel like an amazing album. It was good. I like if I was doing something, I was like cooking or something. This would be the album on the list I'd put on.
Soundtrack to
Just because
cooking.
it had like a nice vibe. Because it is like I don't know if the positive messaging coming out of it, it's nice to listen to these days. I don't see that as much as a negative broadly. But that said, I do agree with Nick about Underdog. It does go. I think it treads that line very, very, very. It's right on the line, and sometimes it's too much, and then other times I listen to it and it's super effective and catchy. But I wouldn't be surprised in like a couple months if this is all over like car commercials and also like series finales for dramas and shit like that. Like so it was a lot. I found it interesting that both of you talk about the Sampha and the Tierra Whack features. I thought I was really excited to see them on the album list, and I was disappointed in both of them.
Oh, really?
I wasn't talking about Tierra Whack actually. Is that one that Fran mentioned? That's not one I was.
I know
Tierra
Whack on Me Times 7. I think that's one of the best tracks, personally.
I just thought the beats in it were just so plodding and boring, and it was just nothing. It just gave Tierra nothing to work with, and so like her resulting bars on it just aren't that interesting. I think she can be a really dynamic rapper.
It's very different to her
just,
music, isn't it? I suppose so.
Yeah, I just think she was not given really anything to really show her skills, which disappointed me. And the Sampha song, I just like. I've heard so many good Sampha songs or Sampha features, and it doesn't compare to the others. I don't think. I found it also a little boring. So.
But it was the most melodically complicated, wasn't it? Of the verse lines and stuff.
Maybe in the context of the album.
Yeah,
but I'm considering the context of like he can come in and really make something happen.
Right, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but yeah, like overall, it was the album was fine.
Not meh, fine, not meh. So,
an upgrade from there.
It might be, I think it might be the best on the list, maybe, but maybe not. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Well, you should go next with something anyway, since
start us off with something, Matt.
Yeah, let's start with Sufjan.
Okay.
Just because I found this album a little interesting. I've never really been big into him. Like, I know some people are obsessed. Like, we're covering both like Bright Eyes and Sufjan. I know a lot of people are obsessed with both these artists and listen to everything they ever make. And I've tried with both of them in the past, and maybe I like a song here and there, and never much more than that. I found this album a little surprising for my expectations because it's a lot weirder than I was expecting. And it's weird in ways which I typically like. There's a lot of like just computer noises and lots of synths and stuff like that, and it's like quirky in a non obstructive way. It's very like quirky and kind of interesting, but not really that hard or challenging to listen to. And so songs like Video Game I found really really engaging. I think because it's kind of weird and a lot of the album just isn't that I guess it's less straightforward. They're more straightforward pop songs are really nice, like tempos holding up the whole album that draw your attention towards them. And Video Game really is that for me. It's one of the few songs that I actually felt like I liked the lyrics quite a lot as well, because it did feel like it's talking about current society and just gamification of life and his rejection of that, which I think is really pertinent with like Facebook and all that bullshit that is controlling our lives these days. And I like because it's video game. It had lots of beeps and bops in it, like a video game. But overall, I thought the album was, again, like way too long. It's super indulgent. There are a few songs that like felt snappy, but often I'd feel like after 3 minutes in a song, he'd explored that space and then he'd carry the song on for 6. And so that, to me, was just, that was
12 at one point, right? There's a 12-minute song.
Yeah. And he doesn't, like, often when people go for a 12-minute song, they're continually changing, continually evolving throughout the song, and this felt like quite repetitive. But yeah. So that's how I felt about it.
Who do you want to go to? You're in charge.
Oh, that's Nick.
You have to agonise it about that long. There's only 2 options, and we're both going to speak. So
well. Often someone jumps in and they're like, "Oh, I really want to talk now."
Yeah, I can talk. That's fine. So
no one really wants to talk about this album.
I know. Yeah, exactly. That's what's going on, isn't it? So I didn't know this artist very well at all, but I really wasn't expecting this album to be like it is. I really thought it would be a lot more straight-laced, honestly, and not have as many synth elements, as much kind of the pinging and beeps and bops of video game, etc. Like you were referring to, Matt. All that stuff is exactly. Is really not. I expected it to be much more straight down the line, as I say, and in the end, it was very dreamy in a way that I was expecting in terms of the vocals. Very kind of dream poppy kind of model. But I think where it fell down for me, I think it was very long. I think that's true. But also, I felt like the beats were really, really stilted and awkward. It was very almost uncomfortable to hear sometimes. I don't mean on the ears. I just mean it just felt like super awkward that he was trying to do these beats, which seemed to me, gave the impression at least that he wasn't a drummer and wasn't using a drummer, that he was like just trying to put them together himself. And if that's the case, and I can sympathise because I'm also along these lines, my own stuff, but I just felt like it didn't come across as flowing in a way that I could really get behind. It seemed to be a lot of jumps and then pullbacks and then kind of clunky, I suppose is the word I might use for it. It never seems to sort of settle. So I appreciate that it's trying something new from what I vaguely understood to be the past work he'd done, and I think it's a lot better than the Bright Eyes for that reason alone. But in the end, it didn't seem comfortable in its own skin, really, I suppose is the best way to describe it. And as Matt said, I agree it was super long, which is for what it had to offer. So I wasn't in love with it, no, but better than the Bright Eyes. So that's me. Fran?
Yeah. Okay, well, I picked this album, and there was a few reasons for that. I think I've wanted to get into Sufjan Stevens for quite a long time. I think I've considered choosing him as the classic on here, and I've waited for like a full length solo album so I could put it on the podcast. And I think that's because I feel like on reputation I should be a massive fan of his. I think he's known for writing pretty bleak and introspective music, which is kind of my thing. He was very folky originally and has branched out a bit since then, and he works with loads of the artists that I love, sort of The National, Bon Iver, and a lot more. Like a lot of my favourite artists work quite closely with him. So I feel like I should be a fan. But on the evidence of this album, the only one that I've listened to, really, I can't say that I am. I think I found it to be overly long, quite meandering, and a bit of a slog. I think it's very samey. I think a lot of the songs sound identical, and the glitchy electronic sound that he's gone for is just not very exciting. And similar to what Nick said there, I don't think they do a lot with the experimentation. I think maybe he didn't go far enough with that. I feel like some of the songs might have been better if he'd have just, I think he writes most of his music with a guitar, and I think they may have been better if he just stayed with an acoustic guitar. He did the soundtrack to a film last year. I can't remember the name of the film. Call Me by Your Name. And there's just 3 or 4 songs on the EP that they're stunning, really lovely little songs, and they're just acoustic. I mean, there are tracks that I quite like. I like Video Games, and I like the title song, but I struggle to see how this album justifies being 80 minutes long. I don't think it has many ideas. So yeah, I think in the end it's not really the one for me. I didn't dislike it enough to make me not want to listen to any more of his stuff. It was better than the Bright Eyes. It was much better than the Deftones. But from everything I've heard about him, I want to go and listen to Carrie and Lau, which I've thought about doing as the classic on here several times. I think from the sound of it, I'll probably love that album from everything I've heard about it, but I won't be returning to this album, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good. Like I've heard songs from his previous albums, and they're much better. This does feel like he's experimenting with these new sounds for the first time, and as a result, he's finding stuff out that people have found out before.
Yeah,
and so
it
it's
doesn't
exciting
feel
to
original,
him.
does it?
That's a very good point. Yeah.
But to follow on from because he has worked with Bon Iver, and I know they are friends.
Yeah.
You think about, I know
And
Nick, you're not a
Saint
fan, but if you
Vincent
think
as
about
well.
the stuff that Bon Iver's done,
yeah,
it's so much more interesting than this in terms of the glitchiness and the using a bit of a folky sound with electronics, and it just doesn't really come off on this album. But yeah, like you, Matt, the odd song that I've heard over the years I've loved, and and Carrying Loud, I know Mike, who came on the podcast previously, he played it to me once, but we were very hammered, and it's a very miserable album. I loved the sound of it at the time, but I was like, this is not, it's not the mood for it. So I think I will go back to that album, but that'll be my next thing with him, I think, rather than this one again.
Cool. So
leaves...
you want to kick us off, Fran, with Woody?
Yeah, Woody Guthrie. Okay, so yeah, Dust Bowl Ballads. So firstly, I want to say I really appreciated getting to spend some time with a Woody Guthrie album. Given how much I love folk music, and he's always been someone I've wanted to dig into. I actually know loads about him. Yeah, thank you, Matt. Well done. I don't know why I never thought to put it on, but I actually kind of know loads about him as a person without actually knowing any of his music, and I even went to like a full day long festival of people performing his songs and songs influenced by him, and he's a fascinating person, and I think a lot of my favorite artists, from Bob Dylan to the tallest man on earth, like, they probably wouldn't exist in the form they do if it wasn't for him. So I owe a huge debt to him in terms of the people he's influenced, so I'm really glad to spend some time listening to him. But yeah, when it comes to the music though, this is the oldest classic we've done, and I think that was definitely apparent. It feels very old, but unlike a lot of the classics we cover, I don't really think that was to its detriment. I think this music must have seemed absolutely revolutionary when it came out in the 40s. I was reading that apparently it's the first ever concept album, and it's some of the first ever studio recorded protest music. And I think the power and importance of it still comes across today. I love the sentiment of it. I love the simplicity. I love the humor. I love the storytelling in it. I know it sounds ancient, but I don't care really. I think it's I really enjoyed it. And without this album and the stuff we did after, I think a lot of the music that I love today wouldn't be about. So it was just I just really enjoyed listening to it. And I think of all the classics we've done, and I'm not saying I'm going to listen to this again and again because it does sound very old, but it's the most I've enjoyed a classic album the whole time we've been doing the podcast. So yeah,
wow,
got a lot from it.
Matt, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So that's actually one of the reasons I picked it, because I heard he'd made one of the first concept albums, and he is so influential. And obviously, with the election at the moment and his songs being used by people who don't necessarily represent his values, I thought it'd be worth digging in. And yeah, so like this whole experience listening to it, I found really interesting. It's a time period I have really enjoyed reading about in the past. I'm a big fan of John Steinbeck's work, and so this felt like a very a partner to some of the, like, Grapes of Wrath and stuff like that. And but like more to this, the very like literal storytelling he's telling is really effective, and compared to some of the lyricism in some of the other tracks we've covered today, it's so much more effective. And even though it's very straightforward, it's very funny. It's very evocative, and even though it does feel like a historical document, and sometimes the other times it just feels very emotive. And I think to have an album which is covering these like traumatic events for so many people, to cover all the different aspects of it, like it's not just life shit, life still shit. He's covering like the optimism, he's covering the struggle, and he's covering all like lots of different aspects of it. And so I found that really like refreshing, because a lot of people, when they write a song, album like this or a concept album, they don't. It's often one dimensional. And so yeah, I really really actually enjoyed the lyrics far more than I have done in anything recently.
Wow.
And so yeah, obviously musically it's a little less dimensional than modern day folk like Sufjan, but I don't think that's to its detriment, as Fran says. So I just generally really enjoyed this.
I think it's really interesting. Before you cut in, Nick, I think you mentioned the election at the start there, and that festival I was talking about that I went to. There was this guy who performed a load of Woody Guthrie songs that were actually about Trump's dad, Fred Trump, is it? There were all these like anti-Fred Trump songs because apparently he owned a lot of housing, and he brought in all in these laws that stop black people from buying, these rules that stop black people from buying all his housing, and Woody Guthrie did a whole album of anti-Fred Trump songs. So it was definitely a good time to listen to it, and it's worth checking those songs out as well.
Yeah, Matt can speak to that in New York, or Trump's legacy and what he made his money off as a family.
Yeah.
I mean, and the disgraceful behaviour they engaged with.
Yeah, I think actually before again, sorry Nick, but he did say in one of his songs that wherever folks are struggling, I'll be there, and to write music about it and to document it, and And
you've got to say, like Bob Dylan, like if you look what Bob Dylan did after, he is so indebted to this guy, isn't he? And it's amazing to see someone like Dylan's going to have the career like he has, obviously. But yeah, Nick, you go.
So I would say I'll start with a caveat, really, which is I this is really stretching the notion of it being an album we can judge here to me, because it's more of a historical artifact than it is like a piece of like a musical collection of songs that we can kind of enjoy or not enjoy. It feels like it's, first of all, both in terms of its weight, its significance, its importance. Obviously, anyone who thinks Woody Guthrie is not important is obviously insane. The list of people who are influenced by him is absolutely absurd. An entire genre, basically, you could argue. So that's really crucial, of course. But also, and the history of the time is really rendered well. But again, it still didn't seem to me, as I tried to get into this album personally, like it was actually something that I was able to judge as a piece of music. And one thing that was a bit unnerving to me was that I discovered that a lot of the songs are based on older melodic structures that he was using and writing new lyrics over, they were like traditional. I don't know if they were folk at that point, but they were traditional songs that he kind of co-opted and used in different ways, which I think is very interesting. And I'm not offended by it at all. But I did think it kind of made it even more complicated to understand how I'm supposed to judge this album by this artist when it's so significant, when it's so historical, when it's built out of this even longer lineage of music. Yeah. So that made it really difficult for me, I have to say. But if we try and push past that stuff, I found it very interesting to hear. I mean, the stories in it were very interesting. I thought the actual, because I would say this, wouldn't I? The actual like recording of it, I was really interested in. It just sounded amazing to hear like through that kind of telescope almost, kind of through that sonic telescope, that tiny sound that's being generated by these probably the whole thing on one mic. I found that really fascinating, to hear back through time in that way. I thought that was really interesting. Obviously, it's very informative and very sort of clever about the sort of cultural concerns it talks about in the Dust Bowl, and it has an awful lot to say about that. And I can see why it's so influential on that basis. And at the same time, as I say, I'm glad I heard it. But if I'm honest, I can't imagine I'll be going back to it, just because, again, it feels like I'm going to a museum, not listening to an album. A fascinating museum with a lot going on, but still, that's not what I'm in this for. So,
as much as I loved it, I don't think I disagree with that. I don't think I'll it's not something I'll listen to a lot. I probably will listen to more of his stuff now, just to get more of a experience of his career and stuff. But it is more an enjoyment of seeing where, the stuff that came from it. And I think it's so apparent, the stuff that came from it. And
I will
and
say
also,
that
I think you said he influenced the whole genre, but I actually think it's even more than that, like protest music in general, which goes across the genres. You could even make an argument that something like NWA would have, not have come around if protest music hadn't been a thing. So it's kind of fascinating just to look at it in that
It is
respect.
fascinating, and I think it's valid to really praise it on that basis, absolutely. But I will say that I'm always a bit skeptical of the lineage argument about this person is good because they did something before other people did it. Like, basically you got to go back to what we're going to go back to Beethoven or what? I mean, there's a line there in music, and it continues, and people make better or worse pieces of work during that process. He's made a good piece of work here. I'm not saying it's bad, but it,
No, I agree. If someone was here talking about the Beatles, I'd be telling them to fuck off because I can't stand
or
the
Elvis,
Beatles, so.
or there's a lot of people who are who've done a lot of things which have made a big impact, which is not actually significant to me. But anyway, So no, I'm not slating it. I'm really not. But I just thought there was a real challenge for me to get into that.
Yeah, I think that's actually some really interesting points there, because especially as he was, I guess, fortunate enough to be there at the transition point where people were going from their spoken tradition of sharing stories using, I guess, the same music or similar music. And then he was lucky enough to be able to actually put that on tape. And then that can be distributed and shared, as opposed to like someone else who may have came up with some of these bars originally. It was 40 years before or whatever.
I think you'd had to have been, that's right in a respect, but also you would have had to be someone who, the reason Woody Guthrie was the one who broke in some ways is because of what he was saying in his songs and what he was able to put forth. So 100%. I think it's, there's a combination of the timing, obviously, but also, someone could have been there who was writing terrible songs that were saying nothing and they didn't break. So I think it's kind of, it's definitely, it's a really interesting thing. It's really interesting to do an album as old as this and think about it in that respect, I think.
Because that's cool. Good stuff.
From Woody Guthrie to Dizzee Rascal, I reckon.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like change of pace.
Well, that's the way it was in the playlist, and I very much enjoyed that. But I guess before I talk about Dizzee, let's talk about the playlist as a whole. I'll jump in and just say I thought most of this was pretty weak. Nothing grabbed me. I wasn't that excited about anything. I enjoyed Woody quite a lot, just as, like we've discussed, it was an intellectual and a learning experience. But I'm like you guys say, I'm not going to put this probably on again unless if I go camping. It feels appropriate for that.
In the Dust Bowl.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that might have the right vibe. But everything else, especially now I'm downgrading Deftones. It was pretty
Flat Earth album.
Yeah.
What do you guys reckon?
For me, it was weird because this could have been a episode where we'd just done classic albums. All of the artists on this are people who are quite well known, well respected. They all could have had albums that we could have put forward as a classic, which I don't think has happened before. It didn't, and nothing on it, not a single thing on it felt fresh and interesting and new. It felt like a lot of classic albums that the thing I've had with classic albums,
weaker versions of classic albums, even.
But even the classics we've done, if we look at the classics that we've done a lot of the time, I've come away from it going, okay, I'm interested that I listened to it, but it didn't really do a lot for me. And that was, if any of these had been a classic album, would have thought, okay, well, I'm glad I've now listened to a Bright Eyes album, but I won't do it again. And that is kind of what I came away with. I think, other than the Sufjan made me think, okay, I want to listen to more of his stuff, but not this one. And Alicia was fun. I won't listen to it again. Woody Guthrie, I really enjoyed, but in general, it felt like a lot of classics that I wouldn't go back to.
Interesting point of view. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Worth listening to Alicia's debut.
Yeah.
I've listened to that in the past, and I enjoyed it a lot. I listened to it when it came out as well.
What was the really famous single from that one? Can you remember?
No. I haven't.
I keep on falling. Yeah, falling.
Yeah. I haven't listened to it in a while, but I think it's good.
Wow.
I would listen to more of her stuff. Like, she's got a good voice, and that was the one of the new releases that did anything for me.
Yeah.
So for me, this was, if we compare it to the previous month's list, where we had, disregarding the fact we had SFA, we had Jane's Addiction I liked, Seb Delisa I really liked, and Apollo Brown.
Shea Noir.
Yeah, sorry, Shea Noir. Sorry, apologies. That's on my notes. So compared to that list, this list was really not exciting, honestly. Yeah, I didn't come back to it. I never came back to it in full. Can't wait for the high point of this. It just felt there was no high point. There were louder bits and quieter bits, but that's about as far as it went. So yeah, and again, this is not to be dismissed with the Woody Guthrie, because I think that's really, really interesting, but not musically something I would come back to either. Yeah. It was disappointing altogether.
Well, hopefully that changes because of
We'll
Dizzee.
see, won't we? Say nothing.
Yeah.
Keep you on tenterhooks.
So I suggested Dizzee because I think he's a massively important artist for me. I love him, but also I think really important for British music in general. And I was obsessed with him for most of like the mid to late noughties, and then have recently kind of rekindled my love for his music recently. And so I think for me, I really got on board when I actually missed the train for when he did Boy in the Corner, but I came on board for Showtime, which is the subsequent album, his second album. And I was really, really, really into it. And then by the time his third album, Mass in English, came out, and he had the song Sirens, I was legit obsessed with him. And I think for that song specifically, it's just such a massive sound. And I remember watching the video and just, it's so like astute and also like politically and also visceral. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like him being chased around by fox hunters through London.
I remember it now. You said that. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, just the coloring of everything. It's really, really, really visceral. A really good video. But then he can produce something like that, and at the same time, he's producing some absolute for better or worse, some absolute pop bangers, like some real, like really good dance tracks that are gonna chart super high, and he seems like, regardless of the style of music, he's making something he seems to really, really enjoy and is having a lot of fun. And so in the playlist, I tried to cover all of that. Even if I know you're not necessarily going to be into a Calvin Harris track, I think it shows it's more as a reference for you. And so the two reasons I think that he's such an important figure really for like UK music is he was instrumental in really bringing hip hop into the UK mainstream, I think. Like when Boy in the Corner came out, it was obviously massive. I wasn't massively into it at the time, but I remember a lot of people talking about it. I remember a lot of people being excited about it. And then since going back to it, I know obviously how good an album it is. And it's because he's making these very astute, very like at times hard-edged hip-hop songs, but then they also have he also has poppy songs as well, like Fix Up Look Sharp, and that has chart appeal, and like people from both sides then are kind of looking down upon it, but also it's irresistible. And so I found that really interesting. And then he's obviously pioneered the individual like UK sound, UK hip hop, as opposed to just taking something from America and having an American sound. Like he is one of the founding fathers of the scene that we currently have, which so many people laud. Him and like Wiley, for better or worse. Like Wiley's often considered the godfather of grime, right? But he's a bit of a dick.
Kind of ruined himself recently, hasn't he?
Yeah, and like Dizzee was there alongside him, but more willing to branch out into more different commercially viable sounds, which ultimately helped the genre. And like he came out with an album 2 weeks ago, I think 3 weeks ago, and he's now returning. In the past couple albums as well, he's returning away from his days of Calvin Harris and Armand van Helden. He's getting his more grimier sound back, but he's still got dance tracks in it as well. So, he's just a really interesting individual making really fun music. So I hope you enjoyed at least some of it.
Can I ask you a question before we get into our comments?
Yeah.
What was the basis for the order of the playlist? Because if I understand correctly, it's not just chronological. Is that right?
Yeah, I just put songs in an order I liked.
Wow. Could you expand upon it a bit more? Okay, I get the gist.
I tried to put some similar songs together, but I also tried not to put any songs from the same album together. So that it somewhat flowed, but had variety across. And then I chucked Nutcrackers on the end because I thought it was funny.
Who do you want to go to, Matt?
Who do you want to talk about it?
Well, let's start with Nick.
Okay. This is, in a way, even though there's some political stuff in this, a lot of political stuff in this is a really joyous album, I felt like. The energy behind it was something that I really got behind and really found kind of infectious. I think it's a word you used as well, Matt. It's really, obviously, it's sort of frenzied and driving all the way through, almost all the way through. And I really generally enjoyed that. I think the best, although I don't love the actual song, the best example of the kind of music that I think it sums up the music is I Love You, actually. Because although the sample I find is a little bit irritating, the actual, it's kind of orally exhausting. Like it's just insanely, the sort of overload of the kick on that and the general tone of it is just so extreme. That it's really hard to keep up with it almost, it feels like, which I really actually enjoyed. I thought also that my favourite track on it was Sirens, I think is one you mentioned as well. I love how it's got those sort of heavily distorted guitars that sit with the kind of, there's a I don't know if it's a crash or a ride cymbal, but there's a cymbal that goes all the way through it that's really overdriven as well. And the guitars sit with that cymbal all the way through, and I thought the two matched together really, really well. It was really well put together. So I think it showed a lot of actual thought and delicacy had gone into the production of this album. It wasn't thrown together. This playlist, it wasn't the songs only weren't thrown together. So, and I also liked, although I doubt Fran will, but I liked Revin because it had Ocean's Wisdom on it, who we covered a long time ago, and his absolutely lunatic speed of flow, which I always find kind of intriguing. But yeah, I mean, it seemed to me to be a party-orientated playlist, and obviously, as somebody who's really party-orientated and full of energy, and I love to dance and stuff, it fits perfectly. No, I could see where it's coming from. I really got into it, and I will listen to it again. This playlist in particular, I don't know about every album, but it worked really well for me. Yeah, so thank you for introducing it.
Nice. I wasn't sure that would be your reaction, Nick. If I'm being honest,
no, I wasn't sure. I wasn't expecting it.
Really? Okay.
I was bracing for the worst.
That's what he said, like at least some of it at the end of his comments.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I fucking love this playlist. I think it's probably my favourite Why I Love playlist that we've had that I didn't create. I mean, obviously,
well, fuck you then. Thanks very much.
All of mine are better, but I fucking loved it. It was really good to spend some time with Dizzee because I think what happened. It's interesting hearing you talk, Matt, about how you got into him with the second album. What's the second album?
Showtime.
Because I loved Boy in the Corner, the debut, and I've always loved that album, and I still love it. But I kind of started to go off hip hop a little bit at that time for a while, and I kind of didn't listen to anything that came after, and I kind of ended up dismissing Dizzee as like a one hit wonder, rather than acknowledging that it was just that I wasn't really into that music at the time. And then he released a few singles with dance acts and people that I didn't really like, and I kind of that just I was like, all right, so Dizzee did one great album, and I won't bother with any more. But there was a couple of singles of his own. You've mentioned one of them, and two of them are on here, Stand Up Tall and Dance With Me, that I didn't like when they came out, but I even really enjoyed those this time around. I think you picked a really good mix in terms of showing like the fun side and the more serious side of his music, which is what I thought you were doing with the way you ordered the playlist. I felt it sort of...
He was, and don't give him that credit. He was just throwing us
thought
together.
that was
He had no real thought at all.
Not. Maybe I'm giving him more.
Complete piss artist. He doesn't know what he's doing.
But for me, I think Dizzee, you did show that side of it. But for me, I do think Dizzee's at his best when he's just having fun. I think his flow is fantastic throughout. I think it's very, very British. And I think that's another reason I overlooked him for a while, because I think I was when I was really into hip hop, it was all US hip hop in the main part. Not so much now. I love a lot of UK hip hop now, but yeah, this playlist kind of showed me that he's a much more consistent and impressive artist that I really had him down as. So I think it's hard for me to look past the songs I already loved. Fix Up, Look Sharp, Just a Rascal, and I Love You, probably still my favourites. But I got into all of it, even the ones that I didn't used to like. And I think I will. It's nice that Showtime's the second album, because that's the one I want to listen to next in full, because the 3 tracks that you chose from that I was really into. And I even like the sort of stuff at the end with it's a bit more playful, a little bit. I think one of them samples something from a musical, doesn't it? And
Nutcrackers.
It was a lot of fun. So yeah, all good.
Wow.
You won. You win, Matt.
I'm very pleasantly surprised. I was when I put this together, I was messaging pickybees.com editor. Go to pickybees.com. Sam, and he said, and I pretty much agreed that you guys, predominantly Nick, is going to hate this list.
Really? Well, I'm happy to disappoint.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you proved everyone wrong. And
I wasn't sure how Nick would react to it. Because I do think maybe it is the poppier side of hip hop at times, and I had a feeling Nick wouldn't be. I didn't think he'd hate it, but I didn't know if he'd be into it.
But it reminds me, talking of the Jill Scott earlier, it's like that. I feel like it's almost all of it is like smiling through it. There's like a lot of joy in it, and that's what carries you through.
And I think that's why I prefer the stuff that's fun with him, even though I think his political stuff is good. That's why I prefer the stuff that's fun with him, because his voice is fun and his inflection's fun, and I think that works really well when it's just Fix Up, Look Sharp, and Just a Rascal are just fantastic, and just a lot of fun. And there's a lot of bragging in them, and there's a lot of sort of the typical stuff in hip hop, but I think he does it really well.
Yeah, I think he often does it in a more tongue-in-cheek way than anyone else. And it, like you say, the joy, it feels like he's just bouncing around the room while singing.
Absolutely, with about 300 other people as well, all at a dance party or whatever,
But I would recommend his newest release, which it's really good. It's really good.
Yeah, we'll check it out. I didn't listen to it when it came out, just because we were listening to this playlist. I didn't want to get confused about what was on what, but I will check it out.
Cool. Right.
Cool.
Well, we did it.
Unbelievable. Only for the 36th time we managed to get through
it. Let's say, Matt just mentioned pickybees.com. Go and check it out. We'll be roughly when this comes out, actually, we'll be launching an Album of the Year tournament on Twitter. So go and find us at Picky Bastards on Twitter and get involved. You can win some record tokens.
Nice.
And Facebook at the Picky Bastards. That's everything.
Yeah, we want to hear what everyone's favourite album is.
We do.
Because I think we all kind of disagree about what it is.
Everyone's going to agree with me, I'm sure. I'm not going to even reveal what it is, but I feel confident that every single vote will come in for one I picked. So
told me to that. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but we'll see.
Okay, so we've got to do next time.
Yeah, next time I've put forward the album by Tom Veck, New Symbols, and Busta Rhymes' album Extinction Level Event 2, The Wrath of God.
I've got to laugh at that title. I've got Gene Dawson's Pixel Bath, and then Conway the Machine from A King to a God, and that's in caps, the a God bit. Just need to make that clear.
Okay. My choice for the classic is Mazzy Star's So Tonight That I Might See. And I'm going to be, for my Why I Love playlist, I'm going to be introducing a very little known artist called David Bowie. Some of you may call it Bowie, but I call him Barry, but you may have heard of him.
Huh.
Maybe.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm excited. Cool. Well, thanks for tuning in.
All right, cheers.
And, see you all soon.
Bye.
Next time.